Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Horror Analysis with me, Drew. Alright, it's my Friday, so I get to do this video and then take a weekend. Hey! Today we're talking about monsterness. We're talking about Noel Carroll, philosophy of horror, and the paradoxes of the heart, and we're talking about what it takes to be a horror story, which takes a monster, according to Carroll. Doesn't just require a monster; it also requires a threat and impurity. Impurity is through interstitiality. Interstitial means it's a category mistake. Let me just adjust the camera real quick. There we go. And category mistakes. Well, the different kinds of category mistakes or different kinds of impurity are here. Carroll's 2 F's and 3 M's. We talked about magnification and massification and fusion thus far. Today we'll talk about fission and metonymy. Magnification, of course, is making things bigger, usually something that's already already considered to be impure. Like a lizard. You take a regular lizard and you make it big enough to destroy Tokyo, you have a monster called Godzilla or Gojira. Or if you make it, a giant Gila monster, is in the movie a giant Gila monster. Or massification, if you take something that's considered impure, like spiders, already kind of disgusting, one spider crawling around, and then you take thousands of spiders crawling around, or cockroaches are kind of disgusting, and then you take a apartment full of cockroaches a foot deep, that's actually drowning a miser in Creepshow. I can't remember the guy's name. I had it earlier today, but I lost it. Or what did I think of today? Maggots. I thought of, one maggot's kind of disgusting. 5 maggots you'd see in like a rotting piece of meat. 15 maggots in a dead cat. If you take a refrigerator full of maggots, that's, all working to get you in some way. Maggots are kind of slow moving, so you probably get away. Meaning it's a lame monster, but it is a monster. Or is it, it is the kind of impurity that could make a monster. Fusion, if you take 2 things and you fuse them together, we talked about last time, it's this. This is all the hand motion you need. Oh goodness, it's so oversimplified. But different kinds of fusion, living and dead fused together, or lobstermen fused together. I like those things to be separate, but Carroll keeps them together. Or Cthulhu, which is, lobster face, bat wings, man, giant-sized, magnified to giant size, and you have Cthulhu. You also have metonymy with Cthulhu, and of course we'll talk about metonymy today. But today we're going to start with fission. Unsurprisingly, it's the opposite of fusion. Taking one thing and splitting it apart. Fusion? Fission. That's ridiculous. Anyway, sorry guys. Before I jump into fission, I'm going to read off this part. His summary. Fusion, fission, magnification, and magnification, and horrific metonymy are the major tropes for presenting the monsters of art horror, which is in our version is horror. This is page 52, by the way. 52. Fusion and fission are means for constructing horrific biologies. Magnification and massification are means for augmenting the powers of already disgusting and phobic creatures. Horrific metonymy is a means of emphasizing the impure and disgusting nature of the creature from the outside, so to speak, by associating said being with objects and entities that are already reviled. Body parts, vermin, skeletons, and all manners of filth. The horrific creature is essentially a compound of danger and disgust, and each of these structures provides a means of developing these attributes in tandem. Fusion and fission are really for making monsters out of non-monstrous things. People are not monstrous, but if you fuse a lobster onto a person, it becomes a monster. If you break a person apart into different component parts, so half the time he's a man and half the time he's a wolf, or in one space he's himself and in another space is his doppelganger, so it's a splitting of him, which is fission, which we'll talk about today. Or if you take something, magnification and massification augment the power. They add to the power of something that's already disgusting. Like spiders all working together. Normal sized spiders, they're disgusting. For some people. Rats, disgusting for some people. But one or two rats. A horde of rats, it's monstrous for everybody. You could be a rat fan and a horde of rats coming at you, a sea of rats. That's monster. Or spiders, or cockroaches. If there's a sea of it coming at you, intent on being hungry or whatever, it's a monster. Or a 70-foot rat, or a 70-foot spider, etc. Metonymy, no matter what you are, if you're associating with really disgusting things, you're going to be... It's emphasized your monstrosity from the outside. We'll get to metonymy even more. But let's go to fission. Let's see, my definition of fission. This was from page 46. I'm paraphrasing because he says it, but he doesn't say it exactly. I'm stealing essentially this from two different paragraphs. In fission, the category... this is a third time I've tried to say it, and I've screwed it up every time. In fission, the categorically contradictory elements are distributed over different, though metaphysically related, identities. Let's go over that bit by bit so we know what we're talking about. In fission... oh my, talking. How does it work? In fission, the categorically contradictory elements, the stuff that makes it a monster, the stuff that makes him pure, are distributed over different, though metaphysically related, identities. It's going to be a lot easier when we go to the different types of fission and the different examples. There's no pure fission type. There's two branches of fission. It branches off into... that's the worst branching motion. It splits. God. Branches. It branches. There we go. Branching off. There's the branching hand motion. God, I don't know how I got that wrong. I got my hot water though, so everything's okay. Branches off. It branches off into spatial and temporal fission. Fission is the splitting apart of categories, as you can see from here. The identities are different though related. Let's start with temporal fission and the most famous example, the Wolfman. This is Lon Chaney's Wolfman. But the Wolfman is there's Larry Talbot. Actually, Lon Chaney. There we go. There's Larry Talbot, who is the Wolfman. Larry Talbot's a great guy. He's courting a nice young lady. He's helping. Well, does his dad die, or is he's trying to sort out his estate, or is he helping his aged father? Well, in this version, I think he's helping his aged father. This is Benicio del Toro, Anthony Hopkins version. In this version, I think his dad's dead. It's been over a year since I've seen it, so. Oh, Lugosi's in this one too. I forgot. Let's say no, he's helping his aged father in this one, so he's a nice guy. Problem is, he got bit by a werewolf, and now he's a nice guy when he's Larry Talbot, and then he turns into the Wolfman. They are different identities, though they're metaphysically related. Larry Talbot is the Wolfman, but Larry Talbot isn't the Wolfman. There's a split there. Larry Talbot has no control over what the Wolfman does. But they're still the same person. The same mass of atoms, if you wanted to. I don't even know if you could do that. Pardon me, do that definition for it. Maybe. But it doesn't work for spatial fission, because spatial fission are doppelgangers, or evil twins, or clones. The same person occupying different space. The split is spatial. It's in space. Part A is over here. Part B is over here. Part A could be living a decent life. Part B is being wicked. But they're related identities. They're evil twins. Well, evil twins, they're two people. But in doppelgangers, there aren't two people. There's one person. Right, so, but either way, it's metaphysically related identities, but they're different. Either they're in different spaces, or they're in different times. Different times, Larry Talbot is either the Wolfman or Larry Talbot. In different spaces, the doppelganger is either, in different spaces, the doppelganger is bad, or the other part of the doppelganger is good. Right. I'm confusing myself here. Alright, so for examples, before I get into examples, I'll say there's also a big thing in here which I'm not sure I 100% agree with Carroll about. The slow, gradual change. Carroll talks about a slow, gradual change of a boy into a seal in one of these stories. The novel of the Black Seal. A boy idiot seems to be transmutating into a sea lion. That sounds ridiculous to me. I don't know anything about the novel of the Black Seal. It's Arthur Machen, so it's probably good, but that sounds quite silly. I'm going to assume it's not, just because I trust Arthur Machen to not write a quite silly book. But that sounds weird. It sounds stupid on paper, but you could make anything a horror movie if you tried. You need monster, but monster can be anything. But anyway, the other one is Kipling's Mark of the Beast. That's one I'm actually familiar with. I read it. Oh, I didn't read it. I listened to it on LibriVox.org, which I'm going to keep plugging as much as possible because it's a great place for free audiobooks. And I like audiobooks, and I like free, because I'm broke. Yeah, so Mark of the Beast was Rudyard Kipling. A guy insults a Hindu god in India, a jaguar god. He's a white guy, and he's like gets drunk, and he insults the jaguar god, and the priest puts a spell on him, and the guy starts turning into a jaguar. He's marked with the beast, sort of, until they kidnap the priest guy and make him take the spell off. It's kind of, well, torture him to take the spell off. It's kind of a gruesome book. It's quite a good story, though. I recommend it. Anyway, so, but the oh, actually, I thought it's thinner now. Oops, pardon me. You know, turning from one thing into another thing slowly, it doesn't matter how, and irreversibly, is still a fission. But it becomes it's becoming a fusion, surely. I don't know. Because if you don't turn back, if you're Larry Talbot, or the other example, of course, is Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, I can talk. You're flip-flopping back and forth. Now, even then, eventually, Dr. Jekyll becomes Mr. Hyde, physically, though his mind is still Dr. Jekyll at the end. That's the tragedy. That's the point of the tragedy. Pardon me. There we go. Can't get comfortable tonight. Oh, I may stretch my back. Oh my. Pardon me. Oh, we're off to a rousing start, aren't we? Here, look at that while I'm coughing and tearing up. Jeez. Oh my, I'm seeing spots before my eyes. That's a good sign. Okay, I'm good. Where was I? Slow irreversible change. If you're flip-flopping back and forth, I get it. Sometimes you're Larry Talbot, sometimes you're the Wolfman, sometimes you're Dr. Jekyll, sometimes you're Mr. Hyde. If you're slowly becoming a sea lion, or you're slowly becoming a jaguar monster, or you're slowly becoming a werewolf, a la Ginger Snaps. It's a werewolf movie, but she doesn't switch back and forth. She's just gradually becoming more and more wolf monster. But in the Wolfman, in the Wolfman is a fusion monster. It's a man-wolf. It's a werewolf is man-wolf. The Celtic word for man is were. That's, where anything is, man jaguar, man wolf, man sea lion. Right. But if you're gradually becoming something, if Lon Chaney was gradually becoming more and more Wolfman, it'd be a fusion monster. He's becoming a wolf. The example I wanted to say, the movie version of Blood and Chocolate. I'm a big werewolf fanatic, so I know all these weird werewolf movies. I don't recommend it. Well, I do. If you've seen the movie, don't read the book. If you've read the book, don't watch the movie. That's what I have to say about Blood and Chocolate. But the werewolves turn into wolves. There's no wolf-manishness about them. They're just human, then they switch, and then they're wolves. It's actually a flash of light. There's no change involved. They just pop. There they are. There's wolf. And they're actually they just had the dogs. The Alsatians. No, I guess they were wolves that were being filmed. I guess they were wolves, but they're trained wolves. Obviously in the movie. But there was no CGI. There was no makeup or men in makeup or man in rubber suit. It was an actual wolf. So I don't know. That's more pure. That's what I'm calling temporal pure, and then temporal impure is the gradual change, which would be ginger snaps. Carrolls' example of the idiot boy becoming a sea lion, or Mark of the Beast, where he's gradually becoming a jaguar man, which is a fusion monster. Oops, hitting buttons. Yeah. So I have issues with it. I see his point, and I'll go along with it, but it doesn't seem as pure to me. Also, other examples I had, where anything, temporal, if you're turning from, the cat people was another one. Val Lewton's cat people. She's a woman, and then she turns into a jaguar. And then she turns back into a woman. Sort of. There's a fantastic element that we'll get into when we talk about the fantastic to cat people, because you never really see it. But Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde, I said, Wolfman. Princess Fiona in Shrek, who was a were-ogre. And during the day, she's a princess, and during the night, she's an ogre. Not that she's a art horror monster, but it's an example. Okay, so and then spatial fissions. Doppelgangers, I've mentioned, is the pure example. Evil twins are sort of clones, like Arnold Schwarzenegger's The Sixth Day, where his clones are doing stuff. I don't know. For action movies, there's more. Face Off, where one guy's doing the good guy's doing bad stuff because the bad guy has his face, and the bad guy's face is on the good guy, and he's trying to hunt down the bad guy with the good guy's face. Things get confusing when we're talking about fission. Language breaks down. But if you've seen Face Off, I hope that made sense to you. There's a couple other examples. In alien-type movies or TV shows, TV series, there's usually some sort of episode. And the pod people from Body Snatchers is like this as well, to an extent. There's the abduction thing, where a guy gets abducted by aliens, and the aliens send a lookalike down to take his place. You've seen these in shows before, usually cartoons or something, or I grew up in the 80s, and there was a lot of this sort of stuff going on in TV shows or cartoons, kids shows. And then, of course, there's something weird about them, so they figure out that they're alien. And that usually prompts in the TV shows and the kids shows, usually prompts the aliens to switch back And the guy goes, "Whoa, what happened?" But that certainly could be horrific as well. Oh, before I get into the other example, the other weird example, the best example of it's the equivalent of a spatial impure, because it's a gradual change spatially, which is weird. The picture of Dorian Gray. This is the classic picture of Dorian Gray, the Angela Lansbury. There's also this new one that came out that I've never heard of before I did the search today and looked it up. Apparently that one's got Colin Firth in it. I think that's got to be the friend. But Dorian Gray is out and about being young for 40-something years and not changing. Whereas his portrait, locked up in a room where no one can see it, is aging and showing signs of his sins, and etc., etc., etc. But it's gradual. It's gradual and it's spatial because it's him in two parts. It's the aging him, which should be the normal him, but it's not. Locked up in a room, aging and showing signs of his sins. It's the not. I'm not sure you can call him monstrous. It's not. I don't think Carroll would call Picture of Dorian Gray a pure horror. It's something that space. It's something a being that science doesn't believe can exist, but it's not necessarily a threat. In tandem, they're taken together. The portrait and Dorian Gray are impure, but I don't know if he counts. Does Dorian Gray count as impure on his own? Interesting point, but I'm not sure. The other spatial example I had was voodoo, especially voodoo dolls. If you have if you make the voodoo doll walk, and the person equivalent starts walking, and you make the voodoo doll grab a voodoo doll knife, and the person grabs a knife, and make the voodoo doll walk in front, up behind the person you want to. The guy wants to hurt, and the guy walks behind with a knife behind the guy he wants to hurt, and he goes like this. The doll makes the doll go like that, and the guy goes like this, and he stabs in blood and whatever, death. That's a spatial fission. The guy being controlled is in place A, but his will, his ability to make decisions, or his decision making, is in place B, not near him. That's cool. I like that. Okay, so that's good. Good explanation. His decision making part is in place A, and the actual body is being acted upon is in place B. Place 2. I had another example. This is from Harry Potter, the Imperious Curse. Ginny in the Diary from Harry Potter 2. I've been using Harry Potter 2 over and over and over again with these examples. That's like 3 videos in a row that I've used Harry Potter 2 as an example. Wow, okay. Let's see. Horcruxes in general. I suppose there's threatening element to Horcruxes. Um, yeah, there's so much about Voldemort. Voldemort's such an interesting monster. Um, I wonder if J.K. Rowling ever read Carroll. She uses so much of them. Anyway, magnification of spiders, massification of spiders, um, fusion. Well, that was my example, I guess. I don't know. We'll switch on to that. So yeah, those are the fission types. Um, Temporal, at different times, the monster can be different things. Spatial, at different places, the monster can be different things. The spatial one, you may have an example that may come up, is in the spatial part, you may wonder what part of him is the actual monster. If the doppelganger is committing crimes, then the doppelganger is the monster, not the actual person. But that doesn't really fit. I don't know, I guess it fits for Dr. Is Dr. Jekyll also the monster as Mr. Hyde? It gets weird. Fission gets weird. But it is a means for constructing horrific biology, as Carroll puts it, and it certainly is. So let's jump to metonymy. How am I doing on time? Yeah, let's jump to metonymy. Horrific metonymy is the last category. I'm not sure why Carroll used the term metonymy for that. Metonymy, as dictionary.com defines it, which I looked it up in my Webster's Unabridged, and it's the exact same definition. So Webster's, you may want to sue dictionary.com, or you might be associated with them anyway. But this is word for word, I believe, the exact definition from the Webster's Unabridged. A figure of speech that consists of use of a name or one object or concept for another to which it is related, or of which it's a part. Scepter for sovereignty, bottle for strong drink, count heads or noses for count people. Unless you're in an actual horror movie and you say count heads, you mean count people. The big one that I was always using as an example when I was teaching, and when one of my colleagues used an example, was the best one. Hollywood for the film industry. Hollywood is associated with the film industry. It's a part of the film industry. It's related to the film industry. But when you say Hollywood does this or Hollywood says this, you're meaning the film industry says this or does this. The White House, if you say the White House says, you don't mean the actual house says. The house does not actually talk, it's a house, but you mean the American presidency. What Carroll is saying is sort of guilt by association. Carroll's actual definition: a horrific being is surrounded by objects that we antecedently take to be objects of disgust and or phobia. And or phobia. Antecedently means before. That's pretty much the only difficult word in that. The horrific being, whatever the monster is surrounded by objects that we know are objects of disgust or phobia. I'll get to Carroll's examples in a minute. Do I want to talk about my funny story? I kind of do want to talk about my funny story, and you guys don't have any choice but to indulge me. Alright, so my example. Alright, so you meet a young lady, and you get along well. She asks you to walk her home, so you do. Into the forest. down a dirt road, past the graveyard, and into a swampy area. You know, you're trudging along through the swampy area, through cobwebs and squishy swamp ground, where those disgusting, like, cockroach, palmetto bug, creepy crawlies start crawling over your feet and falling onto your head, and it's even worse for her. She's walking barefoot, but she doesn't seem to mind. She's pretty, and she smiles at you and continues to lead you further and further into the dark black of the forest. And if you don't get the gist of it by now and run, you're going to be the victim. She doesn't notice the snake slither up to her leg and slither around her, coil itself around her ankle. She just keeps walking happily into the slime. A slimy swamp rat leaps onto her shoulder, and she just goes, "Oh, hi," pets it, coos at it. "Hey, buddy, how you doing?" I don't know why she sounds like that, but she does. She pets it on its head like an old friend, and maybe you notice a glint in her eye that you didn't notice before. Maybe a little bit of bloodshot, or something changes in her smile, like her teeth grew. Maybe a trickle of blood drips down her mouth. But nothing really. I mean, nothing wrong with the woman. She looks normal. But she's associated with enough creepy stuff, you know she's the monster. Or if you don't, you're the victim. Or if the character doesn't, you know she's the victim. So that was story time with Drew. Okay, so Carroll's examples. Dracula looks normal. Dracula has a lot of metonymy around him. He looks normal, but he's, unless you're talking about Max Schreck's Count Orloff version, which he's Nosferatu, in which case he doesn't look normal at all. But he associates with tombs and rats and wolves. Lucy, when she becomes a vampire from Dracula, looks normal, but she is hanging around graveyards, so you know that she's a vampire as well. Jonathan Harker feels nauseous every time he's around Dracula. Carrolls, another of Carroll's example is the Wandering Jew. There was good stuff in here. Wandering Jew, who marries the girl, and he looks normal, but he marries the girl, and he says to her, "I'm leading you to our nuptials. The priest will be death. Your parents are moldering skeletons that rot in heaps around, and witnesses of our union, the lazy worms that revel on the carious bones of the dead." So he's, in the tomb and all this coffins and damp earth, unburied skeletons and stuff and demons and whatnot. So you know he's the monster because he's hanging out with worms and skeletons. The Damnation Game by Clive Barker was another example. Actually, the guy must have stolen the name from here, because it's Mamoulian, and you can see Mamoulian. I can't pronounce it. Mamoulian on here, but the normal-looking bad guy is Mamoulian, but he associates with a huge hulking zombie called the Razor Eater, who's rotting away. And while he's rotting away, is also indulging in his sweet tooth, according to Carroll. I'm not really familiar with this one, so I'm going to pass on it. So I can imagine a rotting zombie trying to eat chocolate. That's kind of gross. And just a rotting zombie hanging out with another guy who looks normal, but if they're hanging out together, they're not. Beth in Saul's John Saul's? Yeah, it's John, isn't it? John Saul's Suffer the Children. Another one I'm not familiar with, but it sounded cool. the ghost of Beth possesses a little girl who has a tea party with the corpse of Beth, you know, and a doll in a cat's dress. Sorry, a cat in a doll's dress. There we go. Who's decapitated and the head keeps falling off. Mycroft in Herbert's The Magic Cottage is another one Carroll mentions. He looks normal, but he hangs out in graveyards and summons slimy, oozy things that are diseased, etc., etc. Yeah, so metonymy is guilt by association. It's surrounding itself, surrounding the monster, whatever the monster, if it looks normal or if it looks weird. Because, of course, Cthulhu is a metonymy monster, as well as being a magnification monster and a fusion monster. Cthulhu is the octopus face, bat wings on a man, so fusion. Then you magnify it, make it in gigantic size. And then you add metonymy in, because, you know, the really insane are the followers of him, and the deformed, inbred deformed hill people in a fishing village, who sort of sacrifice for him and stuff. And the insane people have dreams and paint pictures of him from, but they're locked up in asylums and they're all talking about Cthulhu to each other. And he's in Ryla, the city under the sea that's risen. And it smells like what do you think a city under the sea that's risen would smell like? Rotting fish. And there's portents of death and yada yada yada. And you get the picture. So Cthulhu, of course, another metonymy monster. And many others. So you can have the normal looking metonymy and then the creepy looking metonymy too. Because of course Cthulhu's creepy looking, but he's also a metonymy monster. Am I out of water? I am. Finally, my quasi-fission and quasi-metonymy. Norman Bates. Noel Carroll still doesn't call him a psycho, a horror book or movie, because Norman Bates is not a monster, according to this. He's a being believed to exist by contemporary science, because contemporary science believes that schizophrenia is a thing, because it is. Pardon me. But he's a fission. He splits his time between Norman, Norma, and normal. This is the division in Psycho. The division in what Carroll talks about. He talks about neither woman nor man. Norman. So, but the division in Psycho that the characters talk about is normal, Norman, or normal. Normal is the guy who, when the cops come, he acts normal. Norman is the creepy one that's watching the girls undress. And Norma is the mom, as Norman being the mom, and killing people with straight razors or butcher knives or whatever. So, quasi-fission. He's not a monster, but he's definitely quasi-fission, and he's definitely has metonymy. He's surrounding himself with objects that we consider to be disgust or phobia. He's a taxidermist. I'm not in any way saying that taxidermy is, all taxidermists are psychos, but think of how many psychos fictional psychos are fictional serial killers are also taxidermists. Like the amount of taxidermy in Texas Chainsaw Massacre, for instance. In Carroll's view, he even admits that Norman Bates is so close to being a monster, but no cigar. So close. Both King and I are fine with Psycho being horror. We're not as strict as Carroll. Stephen King talks about Psycho quite a bit. Fair bit. So, yeah, but, there's something creepy about taxidermy. I think most people who are horror fans can admit to that. And if you taxidermy your mom, you're creepy. Because that's what Norman did, of course. I guess that's spatial fission. If the corpse of Norma is downstairs in the cellar, and then Norman's running around in his mom's dress being Norma in Norman's view. Is that spatial vision? I don't know. So next time, this was not a bad amount of time for this. Next time I'll be talking about Stephen King's views. I'm actually we're going to finish up monsterness. We're going to finish up what it means to be horror by talking about Stephen King's views of monsters and what it means to be horror, and Lovecraft's. Lovecraft doesn't talk as much about it as Stephen King. Stephen King certainly doesn't talk about it as much as Noel Carroll. So we're actually going to get both of them in one video, whereas it took 3 for this one to talk about Carroll's views. And then we're going to jump into horror plots, which should be good. Our first big section's over. That's huge. And we're on the 6 videos only. Is that right? Only 6 videos, and we got through a whole section. Well, 7 videos after tomorrow, I suppose. And we're done with our first section. Well, I guess it's a fairly small section. We'll talk more about Stephen King's views tomorrow, of course, but we're only going to talk briefly about Stephen King's views of monsters, because a lot of his monster views are tied to monster plots. In Stephen King's view, the plot determines the monster, or the monster determines the plot. There's a big correlation between the plot and the monster. In Carroll's view, it doesn't. I'm not sure. I'm not taking a side on that one, but after you learn more, maybe you'll have an opinion. Alright, folks, until next time, my name's Drew. Thanks for watching Horror Analysis. See you next time. Or Cthulhu, which is, lobster face, bat wings, man, giant-sized, magnified to giant size, and you have Cthulhu. You also have Metonymy with Cthulhu, and of course we'll talk about Metonymy today. But today we're going to start with fission. Unsurprisingly, it's the opposite of fusion. Taking one thing and splitting it apart. Fusion? Fission. That's ridiculous. Anyway, sorry guys. Before I jump into fission, I'm going to read off this part. His summary. Fusion, fission, magnification, and horrific metonymy are the major tropes for presenting the monsters of art horror, which is in our version is horror. This is page 52, by the way. 52. Fusion and 3 M's. We talked about magnification and massification and fusion thus far. Today we'll talk about fission and metonymy. Magnification, of course, is making things bigger, usually something that's already already considered to be impure. Like a lizard. You take a regular lizard and you make it big enough to destroy Tokyo, you have a monster called Godzilla or Gojira. Or if you make it, a giant Gila monster, is in the movie a giant Gila monster. Or massification, if you take something that's considered impure, like spiders, already kind of disgusting, one spider crawling around, and then you take thousands of spiders crawling around. Or cockroaches are kind of disgusting, and then you take an apartment full of cockroaches, a foot deep, that's actually drowning a miser, in Creepshow. I can't remember the guy's name. I had it earlier today, but I lost it. Or what did I think of today? Maggots. I thought of, one maggot's kind of disgusting. 5 maggots you'd see in, a rotting piece of meat. 15 maggots in a dead cat. If you take a refrigerator full of maggots, that's, all working to get you in some way. Maggots are kind of slow moving, so you probably get away, meaning it's a lame monster. But it is a monster. Or is it, it is the kind of impurity that could make a monster. Fusion, if you take 2 things and you fuse them together, we talked about last time, it's this. This is all the hand motion you need. Oh goodness, it's oversimplified. But different kinds of fusion, living and dead fused together, or lobstermen fused together. I like those things to be separate, but Carroll keeps them together. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Horror Analysis with me, Drew. Alright, it's my Friday, so I get to do this video and then take a weekend. Hey! Today we're talking about monsterness. We're talking about Noel Carroll, philosophy of horror, and the paradox of the heart, and we're talking about what it takes to be a horror story, which takes a monster. According to Carroll, doesn't just require a monster; it also requires a threat and impurity. Impurity is through interstitiality. Interstitial means it's a category mistake. Let me just adjust the camera real quick. There we go. And category mistakes. Well, the different kinds of category mistakes or different kinds of impurity are here. Carroll's 2 F's and fission are means for constructing horrific biologies. Magnification and massification are means for augmenting the powers of already disgusting and phobic creatures. Horrific metonymy is a means of emphasizing the impure and disgusting nature of the creature from the outside, so to speak, by associating said being with objects and entities that are already reviled. Body parts, vermin, skeletons, and all manners of filth. The horrific creature is essentially a compound of danger and disgust, and each of these structures provides a means of developing these attributes in tandem. Fusion and fission are really for making monsters out of non-monstrous things. People are not monstrous, but if you fuse a lobster onto a person, it becomes a monster. If you break a person apart into different component parts, so half the time he's a